We are going to hear a little bit about the formation of the early stages of the animal movement by Merritt Clifton, who has been a journalist since 1968, mostly on animal-related news beats, and has been doing statistical research on animal issues continuously since 1979. He's the editor of Animals 24/7 and also served as the editor for the Animal Agenda magazine from 1988 to 1992 and Animal People from 1992 to Animal 2013. He's a keynote speaker at the first No-Kill conference in 1995. He's been advocating for animals in a variety of ways, and he's going to be informing us of a lot of interesting stuff right now. I'd love to welcome Merritt Clifton.
It's taken a long time for the cause to become what it is today, what it began to become in the 1970s, but the seeds within the United States can actually be traced all the way back to 1790, when a Hessian mercenary who came over here to fight for the British, named Wilhelm Dorel, had previously been stationed in India, and he had picked up a lot of ideas from the Hindus and the Jains about the moral equality of species and about vegetarianism. After the American Revolution, instead of going back to England or going up to Canada, like many of the United Empire Loyalists did, he formed a vegetarian religion, a religious commune in central Vermont. It's not clear whether Dorel knew how to even read or write, but we can know something about his teachings because the New England Transcendentalists, who became the Unitarian religion, the Millerites, who became the Seventh-day Adventist religion, and the Mormons, all at their outset had people who came out of the Dorelite group and brought with them his vegetarian teachings and his teachings against hunting. We can also know about them a bit because Dorel, after his commune fell apart, sort of morphed into the Abenaki Native American culture, and one of his descendants has been my research assistant since 1980. Kathy Chopla. She's severely handicapped, so she's rarely able to leave her room, but she does research for me 24/7 on the computer. And the ideas about animals have been passed through her family, we believe can be traced back to Dorel, even though there's no written record. The founders of the U.S. Humane Movement, if you look it up in your Funkin' Legos or whatever, you'll be told are Henry Berg and Carol and Earl White and George Angel, who respectively founded the American SPCA, the American Anti-Vivisection Society, and the Women's Humane Society of Philadelphia, and the Pennsylvania Society for Prevention of Cruelty for Children, and in the case of George Angel, the Massachusetts SPCA and the American Humane Education Society. All of this is true. They were the founders of the Humane Movement, but what tends to get left out of it is that none of the three of them saw as their focal mission operating animal shelters, or really most of the programs for which the organizations that they founded are known. In the case of Henry Berg, he envisioned ASPCA as being basically an advocacy organization for animals that would also have constabulary law enforcement power conferred by the legislature of the state of New York. He advocated for reptiles. He advocated for crabs and lobsters, who didn't think should be boiled alive. He was not a vegetarian, let alone a vegan, although he's not known to have eaten very much meat. But he definitely advocated on behalf of everything that we recognize today as an animal species. George Angel saw as his central mission humane education, transforming the culture, transforming human attitudes toward animals. And he saw the formation of things like the Bands of Mercy, which was sort of like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, but focused on being kind to animals as being the most important part of his work. Carol and Earl White, everything that we think of as being part of the animal rights movement today was part of her work. But she had different societies, different organizations set up to do each component. because she recognized that her supporters were coming from a variety of different directions, and she thought, probably rightly, that if she brought them all together, there would be an explosion and none of them would work. So she was better off building separate organizations. She, by the way, toward the end of her life, was a vegan. One of the first on record. The word itself did not exist, but there is a fairly good record of what her diet was in the last years of her life. However, there's a fourth person who's almost been expunged from the history books, and it's somewhat inexplicable to me because she belongs right in the same category as those other four. This was Diana Bellet. Diana Bellet was a generation younger than the other three, but she became active at almost the same time as a teenage volunteer working in support of Henry Bird's work. Through that activity, she met her future husband, a somewhat older man, David Bellet, who was a New York City jeweler. After Henry Bird died and the ASPCA refocused on doing animal control for the city of New York, which Henry Bird had always opposed, David Bellet and David and Diana viewed this as a betrayal of Henry Bird's intent, and they formed the New York Humane Society and the New York Anti-Vivisection Society, and for a time were taking sort of the same path as Carol and Earl White with separate organizations. In 1921, however, they decided to bring it all together, and they formed something called the First Church of Animal Rights. Now, the reason they incorporated as a church is because this was before the 501c3 status even existed. The only real accessible structure for forming a nonprofit social reform organization was through a religious structure, or through a constabulary structure like the ASPCA and the MSPCA. But they weren't going to be doing law enforcement, they were doing advocacy. So they incorporated it as a church. Their initial organizing meeting attracted about 300 of the best known socialites and business people and so forth in the city of New York. It made headlines, in fact got national headlines, national coverage. Their keynote speaker was an author named Royal Dixon, and that was probably their downfall because while Dixon was sincere about animals and his ideas were also proto-animal rights, he was also a womanizer, a drunk, a racist, and proceeded to offend enough people that he was invited to leave town. And the First Church of Animal Rights disintegrated. But that was hardly the end of Diana Bellet's career as the proto-animal rights mobilizer. She continued to work with the New York Anti-Vivisection Society and with the New York Humane Society. And when the Great Depression hit, and many of the other animal organizations were in danger of collapsing for lack of funds, she had been fortunate enough to keep her fortune. David had died. She had inherited a lot of money. She herself was getting on in years, so she broke up her organization. She folded her own organization and parceled out all of the money to keep, regardless of where they were on the advocacy spectrum, to keep the animal advocacy organizations of New York and New England alive through the Great Depression. Along the way, she met and influenced a couple of young women who I think Alex may mention. Helen Jones, who went on to found the National Catholic Animal Welfare Society, which became the International Society for Animal Rights. And she also met and influenced Christine Stevens, who founded, some years later, the Animal Welfare Institute. It's still around. Many of you probably know its work. Even after her death, she had a profound influence. 2 years after her death, a large estate, the largest that had ever come in the direction of her work, was left to the New York Anti-Vivisection Society, which had already been disbanded and the assets had been distributed. Investigating what became of that money was Henry Spear's first contact with animal advocacy. Henry at that time was an investigative reporter. And it was through that he became involved in all of the things that led to the formation of the animal rights movement that Alex will be talking about tomorrow. Thank you.